Welcome to Turn 1. We're your host, Thomas.
And Jeremiah.
We are going to be covering everything that happened in this year's Hungarian Grand Prix, all of the drama, all of the action, most of it happening up within the top five. I think Jeremiah wants to start somewhere else on the grid. We are, of course, going to we're going to get into team orders. That was the big topic of the day, so stick around for that. We'll have the timestamps down below. You can jump around to pick which topics you want to hear. But Jeremiah, kick us off. I think you wanted to start with some people that had the underdog story coming into the race after qualifying.
It's the underdog story, but it's the tale as old as time, it seems like, so far, at least for one of the drivers. I did want to just give a brief shout out, and that's what this is, for Sergio Perez and George Russell, who started 16th and 15th and managed to claw their way back up to, 8th and 9th? I believe it was.
Let's see. Checo got 7th.
Oh,
no, sorry, that's not right. Checo got 7th, and George got 8th.
Oh, wow. Okay, so 7th and 8th. So if you're looking at just a driver making up for qualifying, I would definitely say Sergio and George did that. On top of that, Sergio's real only race was with George Russell. So for him to finish the job ahead of George and in 7th place, right behind the likes of the Ferraris, the McLarens, and Mercedes, like that's a good race. I mean, I'll give it to him. If he had started up higher, it would have meant more, and he would have finished higher. But nice recovery, I guess you could say.
I don't honestly know if maybe Russell could have, but I don't know if Checo starting higher would have helped. So Checo started 16th and George started 17th. The issue at Hungary, we talked about this in our preview a little bit. It's not the best for overtaking. It's a pretty midfield track when it comes to overtaking. And really your best and only spot is turn 1 and turn 2, right? When you're coming down the straight, or you can slingshot around this the turn 1 and then go into turn 2 and take an overtake. And so whenever you're starting in the back like that, it took them a long time to work their way up the field, but they did it to their credit. We haven't seen that every single week from Checo, him work his way up in the field. So it was nice to see that this week. But I think even if they had started in 7th or 8th or wherever they finished, they would have had a really tough time gaining on the Ferraris, Verstappen, Lewis ahead. They probably would have finished right where they finished in order of where they should have, which is about all you can ask for.
So now that I've given them their credit, now it's time for my big. But here's the rest of that story. Sergio Perez crashed in Q1. That's why he didn't get to advance. George Russell's car ran out of fuel in Q2, and because of that, was not able to advance to Q3.
He went into the setup menu when he was sitting on the grid and clicked down the little fuel slider a little bit too far.
Yeah, and he goes on the mic and he's like, "Guys, why didn't we have enough fuel for the rest of the session? The track's starting to ramp up now. We need to be out there." That's a big mistake for Mercedes. That's a big mistake for Sergio Perez. And I'm calling for Sergio Perez's head. I'm sorry. Red Bull has too many drivers, and Sergio Perez, under pressure, crashes. But this episode's not about Sergio Perez, so I do want to move on from that.
I mean, yeah, we covered that. I'll link our video that we did last week where, I mean, at this point, we're both on the side of bring Carlos to Red Bull. However that is possible. You might have to buy out Checo. I don't really know. But Red Bull has money. Before we get to team orders, any other little topics you want to hit? We'll, of course, hit Max and Lewis at some point. I don't know if you want to hit that now or later.
No, just a shout out to the Alpines for starting dead last.
And Pierre Gasly DNFing due to a hydraulic failure and Esteban Ocon finishing 18th.
What a joke of a team this season.
And honestly, let us know, like, were we wrong a couple of weeks ago when we thought Alpine had something figured out because they had like 2 or 3 decent races in a row, getting some like double points finishes in back-to-back races.
Yeah.
And then now they're just back to the Alpine of the start of the season, which is not what a team doesn't normally build up and then fall off a cliff. They might plateau, but they fell off of a cliff in the past couple of weeks.
It's been rough.
Okay. The story of the day is team orders. And we're of course talking about the Stake F1 team and Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Bottas did not want to give up his spot. That 16th place was his. No, let's talk Oscar and Lando. These are two of the star drivers in Formula One. Lando has more of a social presence. I think he's more well known, of course, with his history in F1. Oscar's a little bit more reserved in his outreach and his engagement. but everybody that is in the sport of Formula One recognizes he's the next star. We didn't know when we would get to this point, and you can jump in at any point here, but we knew Oscar and Lando were both going to be dominant drivers. I don't know if we knew Oscar would be this good this early. And now that we're seeing them compete in Oscar's second year, this was a fight for a race. And we'll get into how it unfolded, but Oscar needs some serious credit, and Lando has stepped up his game ever since he was given a car that he could actually drive in.
So my rebuttal to that is he's not that good that early. We've seen every single race where Lando destroys him in race pace. And the fact of the matter is you can qualify wherever you want, but if you don't have the race pace to get the results that car can get, then who's the better driver? And in my opinion, it's Lando Norris. So this is where things get rocky, right? Because Oscar Piastri was leading the majority of the race, and Lando, wasn't able to catch him, and then all of a sudden lost his tires, and also he had to fend off Max Verstappen from behind, and a bunch of different parts that play into that. But when you get the opportunity to take the lead and you're the faster driver, said driver should finish in the lead. So here's where we're going to get into this discussion, because I didn't like this at all.
So to set the scene, this is a 70-lap race at the Hungaroring. And going into the race, there was possibilities of one-stop strategies. We only saw one driver, Yuki Tsunoda, pull that off.
Yuki, the tire whisperer.
The majority of teams were trying to run a two-stop. As the race developed, some teams had switched over to a three-stop. I think Ocon was one of those. But the majority ran a two-stop strategy. And so you're stopping in between laps 16 and 22, and you're stopping between laps 40 and 50 or somewhere in there, depending on which mix of tires you're going with. So this is the second round of pit stops at this point when all of this starts to happen. And I don't think we fully grasped in the moment what was happening, but on lap 46, McLaren pits Lando Norris, who is running second to Oscar Piastri on lap 46. They pit Lando Norris and they say, hey, we're trying to cover off Lewis Hamilton, who also, just pit. And Lewis at the time was in third and gaining on the McLarens.
16 seconds back, mind you.
Maybe not at this point. He might have been a little bit further back, or was it 16?
At some point it was 16. I don't remember.
Towards the end, it was
what it was.
But at the end, it was definitely 16 because I was looking at that. On lap 46, it might have been around there a little bit closer, but McLaren's logic to Lando was, hey, let's cover off Hamilton. They come on Oscar's radio, though, and they say, hey, Oscar, we're going to go ahead and pit Lando to cover off Lewis, but don't worry, we'll fix this later. And at the time, I was like, what does that mean? Whatever. McLaren knew right there when they pitted Norris that there was a good chance Norris was going to run a successful undercut on Piastri, which he did, because when they pit Oscar 2 or 3 laps later, Norris was your race leader, legitimately, by a couple of seconds. As the race goes on towards the end, probably 10 to 12 laps to go, so around lap 58 to 60, McLaren starts coming on Lando's radio. And they make, what I heard on the Sky Sports broadcast, approximately 10 different radio calls that escalated in their pleas to get Lando to concede the position to Oscar. And Lando waited until there were 2 laps left to concede his number 1 position and let Oscar pass, who at the time was over 5 seconds behind Lando Norris.
Almost 6 seconds. It was like 5.8, 5.9.
It was ticking up over 6 at some points. Lando had come on in his earlier messages and said, tell Oscar to catch up. Like Lando either wanted to have a battle with it or at least see that Oscar was the faster driver. And eventually they got to the point where they said, and correct me if I'm wrong on the quote, but they said, Lando, Oscar's not catching up. You've proved your point, is what they told him.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, after getting into another, that might have been the same radio message or maybe one of the other 50 radio message that happened there at the end, but there was one point where they came on and they were like, they said, Lando, remember what our meetings on Sunday morning was? And, I'm assuming that that's some kind of call out to, if this scenario plays out, this is what we're going to do. The point of the matter is that you see Lando catching, or you see Oscar trying to catch up. First of all, he comes out of the pits, immediately hits the gravel, so that's going to set him back a little bit. But then as things start to soothe in, you think, okay, Piastri's going to start catching to Lando. Lando even came on at one point and says, well, he has the fresher tires, he should be able to catch up. And that didn't happen either, and he gets to the point to where he's all the way up ahead, another 2 seconds. And they're like, look, man, Oscar's not going to catch up. You made your point. He can't do it. And, Lando said something to the effect of like, well, you should have pit him first.
He said that exactly.
You could tell that there was a lot of tension there. I love every second of that. But also it's sad because you're putting yourself into a corner here. And that corner is, if Lando wins, Oscar's going to be mad. The team's going to be mad. If Oscar wins, the team's going to be happy. But is Oscar going to be happy? Let's think about this. It's your first win in Formula One. It's your second year ever. Your first win in Formula One, and it's handed to you on a silver platter. And it's all dependent upon whether or not your teammate gives it back to you. These are F1 drivers. They are the top dog drivers in the top dog sport. They're all selfish, and rightfully so, because they need to be to win races. So when you're asking your better and faster driver to give the race back to his teammate, who's in his second year, he hardly has put in his sweat and tears, like Lando, which is another discussion I want to have, and then they just hand it to him, I don't think Oscar's going to appreciate that.
I mean, I'm sure he liked the win, but not that it's going to have an asterisk next to it, but in his mind, he's going to have to remember that he couldn't beat Lando straight up in that race.
Yeah, he can't be happy about that.
Yeah. So let's give both sides of the story, because there's two arguments to be made here, and we'll tell you where we side, because I think we're in agreement on where we sided with this, and it's different than what we've seen the majority of people say, which is shocking to me. So again, we watched two different broadcasts, and I think we heard the same kind of rhetoric from both sides. But I watched the Crofty and Brundle broadcast, and neither Crofty, Brundle, or any of the three like pit lane reporters denounced McLaren's decision to switch the drivers. They all agreed that Lando should give the position back, and that Oscar should be the race leader and eventually the race winner. And again, as I was watching that, I found it really shocking that no one presented the other side of that argument, which is, well, why should they switch? Because there's a championship battle. On your broadcast, what was the messaging going on from like David Coulthard?
It was David Coulthard, and to be honest with you, I don't remember who the second person is, and that's bad of me. But whatever. Their whole thing was, the person that was with David Coulthard was, they need to make the switch. This is starting to get bad. This is uncomfortable to watch. And David Coulthard's point of view was, he had the same thing happen to him when he was racing, and he was with Mika Hakkinen, and they let Mika Hakkinen through to get the first win, and he was unhappy about that, ignored the radio for the longest before finally letting it happen, did not want this same thing to happen to Lando Norris, and David Coulthard was against it.
Okay, so David Coulthard, the one guy on the various broadcasts against it. So again, as I'm listening to that, I said I was shocked that I didn't hear the other side, because in my head I'm thinking Lando Norris still has a decent shot at the Drivers' Championship, especially given his performance since Miami, this year. McLaren has proved their car is legit. It's arguably on par with the Red Bull, depending on which track you're going to at this point. A few weeks ago we hesitated to say, but it's right there. I mean, and you're really only competing with Max because Checo's struggling to crack top fives at this point. So it's two top five drivers against Max. You've got a really good shot at both the Drivers' Championship with Lando, who is 76 points after the Hungarian Grand Prix away from Max. And you have a good shot at the drivers. Now, both are slightly stretches because you've got to have a really dominant second half of the year. But not a single broadcaster brought up the fact that you are costing Lando Norris possibly 7, possibly 8 points by having him flip that position back to Oscar Piastri. The other thing I want to cover real quick is, it's not like Oscar led 68 laps, right? It's not like Oscar was out there dominating that track for the whole time. He led 46 laps of a 70-lap race. Lando ran a successful tire strategy, came out with the undercut, beautifully performed on fresh tires, took the lead, a commanding lead, and held off Oscar, held off Lewis, held off Charles and Max for 20 some odd laps. That is no small amount of an F1 race. And then at the end was running significantly. We're talking a quarter to a half a second a lap better than Oscar over the last 5 laps. And he's got to give that position up, and he's got to sacrifice his place in the driver's standings when he's battling Max.
It's ridiculous. You have, like I said earlier, you have the driver that's clearly faster in race form, and he's got to be the one. If he's in the lead, he's got to be the one that's prioritized, especially if he's ahead in the driver standings. I mean, we talked about the points before we got in here just to make sure we had our numbers correct, because it's crazy. Lando is 76 points back from Max Verstappen in this championship. So given that Max only got 10 points this race and Lando had the potential to get 25, that's a 15-point stretch there. So you do that a couple times, Lando's immediately in this race. Or let's say on the extreme end of things, let's say Lando wins outright and Max gets second in every single race. That's not enough points for Max to hold on to his title. Lando wins the Drivers' Championship. So by giving Oscar the win, you're sacrificing 7 points for Lando. In reality, in my opinion, 8 points, because for the rest of that race, they were telling Lando, hey, we need to conserve tires, which, by the way, it's your last tire. You're 16 seconds ahead of, the second driver is 16 seconds ahead of Lewis Hamilton. You're all the way up in the lead. Why are you conserving tires? Why? It's your last pair. Who cares? If you're an F1 driver, you know how long those tires are going to last, especially considering he did a stint on those exact tires earlier in the race. He knows exactly how long they're going to last. So if they had just let Lando loose, let him run, he could have got that fastest lap, extra point. That's 26 points instead of 25, and he could have gotten a 16-point lead, a 16-point jump towards Max instead of a 15-point. And instead, he's going to have to settle for second. And it's what, 8 points extra because he got 18 and Max got 10.
These point differentials, that 76 points is post this race. So if Lando gets 7 extra points, he's 69 points to Max. If he gets 8 points, he's 68 points to Max.
It's a problem. I was not happy with it.
You know, the other weird thing is we're calling this team orders because at the end the team was ordering him to switch places. But this is almost reverse team orders, because in F1, you know, his past years, when you would have 2 really good drivers on teams, but one driver that was clearly the one running the Drivers' Championship. In this situation, normally they would be ordering Oscar to concede the position to Lando, right?
Right.
Because Lando's their guy going for the drivers, and it doesn't hurt them in the constructors to switch places. You get the same points.
Right.
This is the reverse of that, and that they're telling the guy with the most points to concede to the guy with the least points. And it's not like this is the last. If this was the last race of the year, if this was the last 3 races of the year, if Max had already clinched the drivers, whatever, sure, give Oscar a win. I don't care. This is the middle of the season. And you have a dominant car at McLaren. I mean, that car is awesome.
Another thing that bothered me, and I mentioned this briefly, that's a whole nother discussion I wanted to have. Let's talk about time in the sport. Oscar Piastri joined last year, 2023. Lando's been in, not forever, but since 2019, and he got in with a McLaren team that couldn't do anything for him. And for 4 years, this McLaren team hasn't been able to do anything for him. He's watched his teammates from F2 and from his karting years. He watched Charles Leclerc win a race. He watched George Russell win a race at Mercedes and Ferrari, respectively. And there's Lando Norris, who's been on a quote-unquote top team for all of the years that he's been in the sport and hasn't been given the car. Now he's finally given the car. He's finally getting his chance to win some races. He's only got 1 win. It's not like he's got 50 and he doesn't want to share one of those with Oscar Piastri. No, he's got 1 win. Every win matters to him right now, and he had an opportunity to get 2 wins now, and instead they gave it to the rookie who it's his second year, or not rookie, but his second year in the sport. And it bothered me, man, because Lando's put in the time on a team that frankly didn't deserve him. Red Bull came calling multiple times, and he turned them down for McLaren. And I mean, that's how they treat him.
But again, we don't dislike Oscar. We want Oscar to do
No,
great things. I'd
no,
love Oscar to win a ton of races. It's just that this one is
absolutely.
slightly tainted because of this whole situation where Lando clearly should have won. I mean, should have is the operative word, but he should have won that race because he was the better driver in the pivotal moments of the race.
2 points to that real quick. One, it's not Oscar's time. We've talked about this time and time again. He is a great driver, and he by all means should be competing with the top drivers and deserves to be 100%. It's not his time yet. He's going to have to sit back and watch Lando win a couple because he isn't there in race trim yet. He's not doing the same lap times that Lando is doing. And until that happens, there's not going to be an equal fight for who's going to win the race. It's going to be Lando because he's faster at every track during the race. This isn't a Senna and Prost situation just yet. It has every potential in the world to become that, but we're not there yet. And so until Piastri's there, we're not going to see that.
What Oscar needed to do to make this it is a legit win, but to make this a win that you could really own, he needed to catch Lando over those last 10, 15 laps, and he needed to put the pressure on him. So much so that he could come on the radio, because we've heard this from other drivers before. Driver comes on the radio and says, "Hey, so and so's going slow. I'm faster than so and so. I'm this faster than so and so." Oscar needed to be in that situation where he's coming on the radio and telling McLaren, "I am faster than Lando.
Then
Let me
we
pass."
hear the Ferrari race engineer come on. Piastri is faster than you.
That's what we needed, and that's what Lando arguably wanted. Because again, on lap like 58, Lando said, "Cool, tell him to catch me then."
Yep.
Like Lando just wanted to see that he could be beat by Oscar, and I think Lando knew that he couldn't at that point in the race. He knew what he had in his tires. He knew what Oscar had in his tires.
But first of
And
all, Oscar had newer tires.
yeah, it's the other weird thing
My
about it.
second point to that is he had to catch Lando. He was not able to catch Lando, and in order the gap increased. Lando got a bigger lead, and when that's the case, so imagine this: the roles reversed, right? Imagine Piastri pit first, and now he is ahead of Lando. Still, Lando comes out, and Lando's catching Piastri so much so that now he's knocking on the door of Piastri. Do they still give Piastri the win at that point, or do they let F1 drivers drive and race against each other like they do at Ferrari because there's no number one driver, and let them go at it?
It's odd. It's not a conspiracy, but it is odd because it almost seemed like the very start of the race. Again, on lap 17, they're telling Oscar that they're going to get, like it's his day or whatever, and it's his time. It almost felt like they set it up for him to win from the beginning. So even if your situation played out where Oscar pits first, gets the undercut, and goes on to stay in the lead, I think they would have had him stay in the front if Lando had caught him. They would have told Lando to stay in position.
So
I don't get it, but that's what it feels like.
if Oscar catches Lando, let Oscar through. But if Lando catches Oscar, let Oscar get his first win.
Is that not what it felt like to you?
Exactly. It felt exactly like that.
The last thing I have on this before we talk a little Max and Lewis, if you watched the last season of Drive to Survive, you saw a lot of the insights to Lando and Zach Brown's relationship. Zach Brown has supported Lando from a very early on in his racing career.
14 or something like that.
Yeah. So they've been working together for a while. They know each other pretty well. And you saw kind of the tension they had about this most recent contract cycle. Lando was on the fence, however much so we don't really know, but he was on the fence about re-signing with McLaren because McLaren had yet to really prove they were great, that they could compete with Red Bull. Now we're seeing that they can, but you didn't know that before the season started. This is something that Lando, I think, will be putting into future contracts, or at least trying to. Or this might be, his excuse for leaving McLaren at some point in the future. If they start prioritizing team or Oscar over him, I could see Lando demanding from a team, "You will never team orders me." Maybe he didn't have that because he didn't have the cachet before this. Maybe that's something that Max and Lewis have in their contracts. I'll never get team ordered. But Lando will certainly probably be asking for that. Or, like I said, in a year or two, if the team does this multiple times, he'll leave.
So I was talking to my brother about this. That Lando is going to put on a smile, do the right thing and all that, but then he's walking right into that meeting afterwards, walking straight up to them and saying, "Look, do not put me in that situation again. Do not put me in that situation again."
We got a glimpse of that whenever he did the post race interview. There on the right when they get out of the cars, they get interviewed, and the second question that he was asked was like, "Hey, what happened at the end?"
He
Like
was
the
very respectful in his answers. I'll give him that.
he was, but on that second answer, it was very short and to the point. It was the team asked me to do something, so I did it. And
Exactly.
he was basically like, I'm not saying anything more about that, even though that was a 12 lap debacle.
Yeah. No, but that's the exact answer that you need to give, because everybody knows there's more to that. Everybody wants to hear the drama, but he's not going to air the dirty laundry. He's going to handle that behind closed doors, and I respect that.
He was also, I think, frustrated in the driver cooldown room. Now he laughed with Lewis a little
Oh
bit, but you
yeah,
could tell
that
there
was a
was some
little
tension.
uncomfortable.
There was tension with him and Lewis, where Lewis just said, "Man, y'all have fast cars." Like he was like impressed, and Lando's like, "You had a fast car 70 years ago, and you made the most of it, and somebody else's turn or something like that."
Yeah,
And Lewis
something
was
to that.
like, Lewis said, "I'm just trying to compliment your car." And Oscar was just trying to like stay out of it and not make eye contact with anybody.
That's rough. That is rough.
Okay, I think last topic on our agenda is Max and Lewis. This was a flashback to 2020 and 2021, if there ever was one. Lewis and Max going at it. What do you recall from the race?
I recall a hot-headed Max trying to make the most of a poor tire strategy and a car that is not performing to what he would like it to. And as he's chasing down Lewis Hamilton, he's stuck behind Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton, by the way, put on some great defensive moves as he was very late on the brakes, shoving Max ever so slightly wide in certain corners, not so much so that he runs him off the track, but to let him know, hey, this isn't going to be easy. Very clean racing, but very, very strategical, and I loved every second of it. It was a defensive masterpiece, and then Max finally had enough. He had the faster car. He could not get around Lewis, and they were going down a straight. I don't remember which straight it was, and I don't remember what corner
It
it
was the
is.
one in between the start finish straight.
Okay, so they're going around a back marker, and Max decides right now, this is where I'm going to make the move. And when Max decides something like that, the Max of old wouldn't back out of a decision whenever he makes it. Now we've seen a cleaner Max last year when they had the dominant car pull out of situations like that because he knows he can get the job done on another couple laps later, or maybe even later on that same lap. But Max doesn't necessarily know that with this car. The car was not performing the way that he was comfortable with, and there are other teams that are showing that they have the potential to take race wins away from him now. So we're starting to see a little bit of Max of old, and I thought it was a little spicy because they're going into this corner, and Max goes hard on the brakes, late on the brakes, trying to get the overtake done on the inside. And man, if he doesn't just slide all the way through the corner, to which that Lewis had nowhere to go. So Lewis tries to turn in, and there's a little collision, which causes Red Bull, those commercials, Red Bull gives you wings. Max goes airborne, nose down, bam, slaps the ground a couple times, and then eventually is able to get going, but now behind Charles Leclerc. But man, he was hot-headed on this mic. It was crazy.
And I'm sure you can give some of the radio messages. I'll just add, there's a clear difference between Max when he's comfortable in a car and Max when he's uncomfortable in a car. When Max is comfortable in a car, you get what you get last year when he won 19 races or whatever it is, where he slides off the track and almost crashes out, and he laughs about it and says, "Oh, almost lost the race there."
Yeah.
But he knows that car was awesome and that he was going to take it and it was just going to be fine. Whenever Max struggles early on, so we heard on lap 17 of this race, he came on to his crew and he said, "I can't brake, I can't enter corners, I have nothing. Like, this car is bad." And so that's on lap 17 of a 70 lap race. When you hear a message like that, Max is, for lack of a better term, going to whine a lot of the day. And Max was whining a lot of the day, complaining about the car, the setup, the other drivers, saying Lewis was doing double moves, which he might have been doing some double moves under braking. It's a little bit iffy. But it wasn't Max's day, and he needed to play it more conservative. So Jeremiah mentioned it, but lap 63 is when Max wanted to make his move, which was an odd choice because you still have 7 more laps in the race. And again, they were passing a back marker. To me, it looked like an Alpine. I didn't go back and watch the back marker part, but they both Hamilton and Verstappen swerve around this back marker as they're like halfway down the straight. So you're already getting to where like you're thinking about braking. They get to the braking zone. Max is going so fast because he couldn't pull off the pass on Lewis that he has to slam on his brakes and lock up. And when they slam on their brakes, they can no longer turn. So he just goes straight off the track. And as he's doing so, Lewis has to turn in because there's nowhere else for Lewis to go other than to run off the track with him. And, Max's rear left contacts Lewis's front right. Max goes airborne. Lewis keeps going. Somehow Lewis took no damage from that I could tell.
Honestly, neither did Max, really.
No, maybe his floor did a little bit, slamming on the ground. But yeah, Max goes about 3 feet in the air, slams on the ground, turns it around, gets back on track behind Charles in 5th. But it was the Max of old. Like you said, it was the 2020 Max where Max didn't quite have the car to compete with Lewis. And so that was the year where they crashed out in like 5 races because Max just kept pushing it too much. And luckily he didn't, ruin both of their races, but it is interesting to see the difference in him being comfortable versus uncomfortable in a car.
Yeah, I have a couple more points for that. One, he said that Lewis turned in or moved under braking or turned in early, something to that effect in that corner.
I thought he was doing double moves, like a left-right.
Regardless, if you're just sliding across the corner, taking up the entire track, who cares when he moves, what he does? There's nowhere for him. You slam the door on him. You put up a wall where there's not supposed to be one. I mean, what is he supposed to do? It doesn't matter what Lewis does in that moment at all.
Max walked into the steward's room after the race and said, "Do you know what number's on my car? Number 1. You make this go away."
Slides them a 50.
He says, "You know what number I've never seen on Lewis's car? Number 1." And they're like, "Max, he won."
Oh, because
he just didn't take the number.
No, the other point that I wanted to add to this is that Max had the potential to get a podium. And realistically, if the move didn't get done on that turn right there, okay, fine. You can't get it done on turn 2 either. You go around again and you get as close as you can to Lewis's backside right before the final straight. And then on that final straight, hit the DRS, make the move around him, maybe some late braking there at the end, whatever you have to do, stay in the slipstream, do something. But they had still 15 laps, 10 something.
He had 7. So that was lap 63. So he had 7 more tries. Even if you're only going to go for the pass on turns 1 or 2, you've got 7 more tries.
Which is, if you're going for 2 different opportunities to pass around this track, turns 1 and 2, that's 14 more opportunities to make this move stick. And
you didn't have to do it there.
Forcing it right there, right then. Now, I'm assuming that his mindset was, I got to get around Lewis so I can make headway towards Oscar. But Lewis was way back there, and there was no chance that Red Bull was going to catch up to the McLaren. Otherwise, it would have done it earlier in the race when Lando and Oscar sailed off into the distance. So that wasn't going to happen.
We didn't get the full complement of the team radios. It was a lot at that point. It was a lot of the Oscar and Lando team radios. So the only thing we heard from Max really was the collision where both drivers were talking about that.
And of course, one radio.
Well, both point the fingers at each other, but I do wonder if the team was giving Max enough information to know that Max wasn't going to catch the top 2 or 3 runners at that point.
That's a good point. If they had told him that, then he would have settled for trying to get 3rd. But regardless, as a driver, your job is to maximize points, and you should be able to tell if I'm not catching up to McLaren on laps 1 through 40, then what makes me think that in this last 10 laps that I'm going to catch up to McLaren if I get around Lewis?
I would have thought that his engineer would have come on and said something to the effect of, "Hey, Max, your battle's with Lewis. That's the only guy your battle's with. So you've got 7 or 8 laps to play out a battle with Lewis."
No, but the only radio message we did get to hear coming in through the commentators or for the main broadcast channel was, I guess they had told him that you need to bring these tires in gently because we got to make them last for the rest of the race. And Max comes out just screaming, with nothing left, just giving it everything he's got to try and get around Lewis. And so GP comes in and he goes, "It's not very gentle," or something to that effect. And Max goes, "No, don't give me that BS. You're the guys that put me on this strategy, and now I have to try and save this race." He was so upset.
Was that the one where Red Bull GP replied, "That's quite childish for team radio"?
That was after the actual wreck. So the
Okay.
one that I'm talking about was before, but after the wreck, I guess Max came on and was talking about Lewis turned in early or something to that effect, whatever his excuse was. And GP said, "I'm not going to talk about I'm not going to talk about this about or with you over the radio. That's childish." And I was like, "Oh, a little bit of
Yeah.
drama." There was so much anger on this track in the last like 10 laps of this race. It was ridiculous.
Two of the top drivers, Lando and Max, just hating everything about their lives for about 15 minutes.
Ticked at their teams, not listening to their radio engineers whatsoever. Just I think
Hey, they go.
ever since Miami, things with Lando and Max, not necessarily with each other, but with like how they're approaching this season has just been completely different. I mean, we see this drive from Lando where he's tasted it and he wants nothing but wins going forward. And Max, where he's tasted defeat from Lando, and not because he made a mistake, but because Lando was better. And so now he's like, okay, going forward, there can be zero mistakes with the car or with myself.
It's a crazy dynamic. You're right, because Lando now, he knows what he wants. He knows what he can get, which is winning races, and then eventually, if not this year, possibly next year, competing for championships. And Max sees it not slipping away yet, but maybe like the potential for it to slip away is there if these things keep piling up and stacking up. And so, yeah, you see them kind of, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? You see them kind of taking out their frustrations on each other. And then this week, you see them just taking it out on other people on the track because they're both unhappy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Hey, maybe they can get together and, celebrate their dishappiness with this race and become friends again.
Go out to dinner together.
Man, wasn't that a stupid race? Yeah, it was, man. It was a stupid race.
What was your problems with it? What did your race engineer say? This is what mine said.
Mine was telling me to let this kid pass.
And Max would have been like, "Oh no, last time they told me to do that, I told them, I told you guys not to ask this of me back since Monaco. Don't ask this of me ever again." Back when Checo was trying to pass
took my
him.
helmet off and threw it out of the car. Can't hear you anymore.
Oh,
all right,
geez.
let us know in the comments. Are we just? And I have to bring this up because there's a faction of F1 people that are going to think we're completely off base with our analysis of the team orders things. But what are your thoughts in the comments? Was it right for Oscar to win that race, or should they have let Lando kind of legitimize a legitimate win?
Guys, if you think that Pierre Gasly, if he didn't get that hydraulic leak and have to DNF, if you think he had a shot at winning this thing, you're way off base. But that would be wild.
All right, guys, we'll see you.
Bye, guys.